This is a republic, if you can keep it, with Mark Brewer and Jeff Timmer.
I'm Jeff Timmer. Welcome to the Unredacted episode of A Republic If You Can Keep It. The 2017 Donald Trump lavished praise on the multi-billion-dollar plan crafted by Michigan and Canada to build the much-needed connector for our two economies. The 2026 Donald Trump sees the Gordie Howe Bridge as nothing more than a bargaining chip. We'll get into the details of the potential economic disaster with former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, also a former Michigan governor, Jim Blanchard.
I'm Mark Brewer. Jeff, I have a solution to the bridge controversy. Instead of calling it the Gordie Howe Bridge after our much-beloved hockey hero, let's rename it the Donald J. Trump Bridge to Greatness. Perhaps that'll persuade the president to change his mind. But meanwhile, here in Michigan, for Michigan Republicans, Bridgegate poses a new choice. Are they for Michigan workers or are they for Donald Trump? And for now, it appears that most Michigan Republicans are choosing Trump.
In Washington, D.C., which stands for District of Chaos, Trump's Justice Department war on his critics loses again. It's said a prosecutor can get a ham sandwich indicted, but Pam Bondi couldn't get a federal grand jury to indict U.S. Senators Alyssa Slotkin and Mark Kelly, or 4 House Democrats, for what they were trying to label as sedition. Slotkin and Kelly told reporters they refused to be intimidated by the White House bully.
The heroes of yesterday were these 20 anonymous grand jury members. I don't know who they are. They were picked at random, and they taught us more about just basic democracy and rule of law than the President of the United States and the Attorney General. So, it's a positive thing the way it came out, but it should have never happened.
And Jeff, here in Michigan, another federal court has rejected efforts by Bondi and the Department of Justice to get confidential details of all of Michigan's voters. And the decision came from a Trump-appointed judge.
8 years after running on a pledge to fix the damn roads, Gretchen Whitmer is celebrating bipartisan legislation that's doing just that. Her new budget calls for an extra $2 billion in road and bridge funding, a continuation of the budget deal enacted last October. The executive budget for fiscal year 2027 will fund both state and local roads as it executes the first full year of funding for Michigan roads.
Whitmer's proposed $88 billion budget is based on roughly $800 million in tax increases, $630 million in cuts, and $400 million from the rainy day fund. It calls for increasing the state's sin taxes to fill the gap left by Trump's big ugly bill and related budget cuts to Medicaid and nutrition programs. Republican House Speaker Matt Hall says any tax increase, even if it's on tobacco and gambling, is DOA in the House. Meanwhile, Senate Appropriations Chair Sarah Anthony counters, if that's your position, show us what you'll cut.
Under the Trump administration and congressional Republicans, it has taken a toll on Michigan's balance sheet. So whether it is looking at our health care costs that continue to rise, but just also so many deficiencies in every single department, we're going to have our work cut out.
So the big question coming up in the upcoming budget negotiations, will Michigan House Republicans dare to cut Medicaid benefits to 1/4 of the state's population, including many of their voters, in an election year?
Trump's economy is hitting Michigan's auto workers. Ford reports that the 2026 profit-sharing checks will be 1/3 less than the 2025 checks. That drop impacts not just the UAW members, but also the local businesses where those workers spend money.
In other big election news here in Michigan, 2 of the 3 people accused in the case regarding fake nominating petition signatures for candidates in 2022, including several Republican gubernatorial candidates, were found guilty of numerous charges by Macomb County Circuit Court jury after just 2 days of deliberation. A third person, the spouse of one of the defendants, was acquitted on all the charges against her. This signature fraud in 2022 likely contributed to the Republicans nominating Tudor Dixon for governor, who was then swamped by Governor Whitmer in the election. Unfortunately, the scores of persons who actually forged those signatures remain at large and available to do it again. Jeff, that's a quick summary of the news this week, but why don't we turn to one of these topics specifically and talk about the implications of this loss by the DOJ this week. It's the most recent of these losses when the Trump-appointed federal judge here in Michigan said the DOJ cannot have access to an unredacted, complete copy of Michigan's voter file, including things like Social Security numbers, dates of birth, and so forth, which is intensely private information. This has been part of a nationwide scheme by the Trump administration through the DOJ to get all of this information. And of course, many of us suspect, you and I have talked about this, that it's all part of their design to interfere with, if not rig, the election by having access to all this information. So what do you make of this recent court decision here in Michigan?
Well, as you said, we've been talking about this for most of the last year or year plus since Trump won, surprisingly, his non-consecutive second term in the White House, that given the way he tried not to surrender power after losing the 2020 election, we need to be prepared for anything and everything when it comes to what he will do to maintain power in Washington and not have to surrender any ounce of the power he's consolidated. He has completely co-opted the legislative branch of the Congress, supposed to be an equal balance to the executive's power with oversight and funding powers. He has neutered the Republican leadership and the rank and file members of Congress. They've abdicated the power of tariff to Donald Trump. It doesn't belong to the president, but because they don't stop him. He says he doesn't drink, but his tweets and Truth Social posts certainly would beg to differ with that. The nonsensical, gibbering posts that he puts in the middle of the night about tariffs, Canadian said something bad about me, so we're going to have 1 billion% Canadian or tariffs on Canadian goods. The Prime Minister or the President of France says something about Trump, and so we levy tariffs against our closest ally and longest ally. They've abdicated all power and responsibility to Donald Trump. So Trump, they know, they see the numbers. Their polling shows what everybody else sees, that his support is collapsing. The support for Republicans has collapsed. We see real world evidence of that in election after election after election. Last week, we talked about the most recent special election in a state Senate district in Texas, where there was a 31-point swing from the 2024 election. District Donald Trump won overwhelmingly by double digits. A Democrat won the special election last week by double digits. Republicans are going to lose not just close districts, but a lot of districts that have never been in jeopardy in a normal, all else being equal political times would not be in jeopardy of losing. It's not just the Tom Barretts and the Bill Huizengas that need to be concerned. It's folks like Tim Walberg or Lisa McClain or Jack Bergman or John Molinar, who now need to be looking over their shoulder in Michigan. People in +8, +10, +15 Trump districts are no longer safe in this environment. And regardless of how the three-way battle for the governor's mansion in Michigan shakes out, and the down ballot Republicans are going to be significantly, and I think very toxically impacted by the policies, the Trump economy, the Trump lawlessness, the Trump trampling of civil liberties and constitutional rights, his ignoring of the rule of law, the rampant, just astronomical, enormous corruption that we saw in really, it's that kind of corruption that's at the heart of what we're going to spend time later talking about with Governor Blanchard, the Canadian the Gordie Howe Bridge, which isn't a policy difference between Trump and the Canadians, or even Trump being mad at the Canadians. It has to do with the Maroon family, who gave the Trump inauguration and Republicans a shit ton of money, show up and meet with Howard Lutnick, and within an hour, Donald Trump declares the bridge will not be allowed to open. It is the purest form of pay-for-play political corruption that Trump has just normalized, and people don't even bat their eye at it anymore, where the Qataris invest 49% in his crypto company. We find out about it later. There's no congressional investigations. They're just giving him billions of dollars. Foreign governments. It's become normalized. The enormity is of his personal enrichment. This is a money grab in an attempt to stay out of prison that Donald Trump was headed for before he got reelected. That's what this is about. It's about not surrendering power in the election. It's about trying to control the outcome of the election by manipulating the sensitive databases that are controlled by the states who administer elections. It's about making people fearful about going to the polling places because of threats of armed, masked federal troops. You name it. If you could, whatever the most outrageous, scary, maddening scenario that we can envision, we have to expect will come to fruition, because over the last 10 or 11 years, they have.
Well, Jeff, you're absolutely right. And while this victory this week in court here was a great victory, our listeners need to understand that the pressure is only going to increase. There's a massive, multi-layered effort going on by Trump and his allies to suppress the vote next year. Even as we speak, they're debating the so-called SAVE Act in the Congress, right? Which is nothing more than voter suppression. We expect a ballot proposal to be soon to file its own signatures here in Michigan, which would be the Michigan equivalent of the SAVE Act. We have, at the federal level, Trump has gotten rid of all the cybersecurity protections for our elections. The Trump administration and all of its officials refused to even meet with secretaries of state when they were in Washington recently to talk about election security issues. We talked to them about this last week, what happened in Georgia with the Department of Justice seizing ballots, setting the groundwork basically to seize ballots and voting machines this year. And here in Michigan, the Republican Party is constantly filing lawsuits seeking to make it harder for voters to vote absentee, for our overseas voters to vote. So again, this is a massive, multi-level, multi-pronged effort by the Republicans. And frankly, it's just getting started. So while we should celebrate this victory in court this week, we can't let our guard down, because the election, the polling, the special election results, Jeff, that we've talked about, look so bad for the Republicans that their only resort at this point is to try to manipulate the results in the many ways that we've talked about. But Jeff, let's talk about another topic that we brought up in our introduction. This is something, sadly, you and I predicted would happen. We now see that the profit sharing checks for the auto workers are down dramatically. GM announced they were going to have a much lower check last week. This week it was Ford, Ford actually reported a business loss for last year, attributed in large part to tariffs, but also for them having to write down and write off all their investments in electric vehicles because of what the Trump administration has done in that regard. So what kind of economic impact and political impact do you think these cuts in these profit sharing checks are going to have here in Michigan?
I think it's just going to add more weight to the amount of dirt that's being shoveled onto the Republicans running in Michigan this year by Donald Trump and the Trump economy. It's not even a dotted line. It's a straight line between Trump's economically illiterate tariff madness that we've seen over the last 13 months now that he's been in his second term, and the this outcome was predictable by anybody. I am as far from a learned economist as you can possibly find, and it's simple enough for me to understand how raising the cost of inputs and the retail price borne by U.S. companies, importers, and consumers, paid for by U.S. companies and consumers, to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. And whatever Michigan has a large is the 10th largest state still in the United States. We have a huge impact, an outsized impact on the U.S. economy, and this will hurt Michigan's economy more so than other states because of the number of auto workers that we have in Michigan, and not just auto workers, but all the supplier businesses and the businesses that exist in proximity to the auto plants, as well as just the general spending by everybody impacted. It's going to have a continued downward effect. We already have those inflationary pressures that are continuing to mount. Prices are not down. They are up since Trump has taken over. Jobs are not up. They are down, not just in Michigan, but across the country. There was no job growth in 2025 based on the whether or not you can even trust them numbers from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics that has now been gutted and replaced with Trump loyalists. I think we have to look for some independent verification of the real numbers out in the economy. I've seen reports that the revised numbers should actually show, significant job losses across the country for 2025 and as we head into 2026, which should be no surprise. Trump lost millions of jobs in his first term, more than any president in American history. He has picked up in the last year, this first year of his second term, right where he left off, losing jobs, putting enormous pressures on Americans economically. And they're going to pay the price in the elections. And I really think that when we start talking about things as we did in our open about the budget numbers and the details and this increase to that and this decrease to that in the budget, I know it makes a lot of listeners and it makes my eyes kind of glaze over when we start talking about that. But I think there's something very politically savvy going on here with the governor's budget. And it stems from this economic madness that's being created by Trump, by the policy madness that's created by their gutting of federal Medicaid funding and the pressures that they're putting on state governments, where the governor, yes, she's proposed these sin taxes on vaping and cigarettes and marijuana in Michigan, and that largely offsets this proposed property tax refund for seniors over 65 years old. But what it does is it sets up and tees up the Republicans between a rock and a hard place. Those Lansing Republicans running in frontline districts, which is now expanded. The battle for the legislature is playing deeper in the Republicans' backfield than it is in the Democrats. I think that's something people need to keep in mind. It's not just those districts that were competitive in 2024. It's going to be those Trump +5, +10, +15 state House and state Senate districts where Republicans are suddenly playing defense and losing their majority in the House in November and failing to regain a Republican majority in the state Senate. But what the governor in her team with this budget has done is set Republicans up to have to, by voting against these proposals, they're going to have to vote against the Medicaid funding that their constituents rely on disproportionately, especially in these rural ruby red Republican districts. And we have seen districts like that across the country during the last year in special elections. We've seen Republican vote erosion, and Republicans are going to be between a rock and a hard place. Matt Hall is willing to follow Donald Trump over a cliff. most Republicans are willing to follow Donald Trump over a cliff. Will Michigan legislative Republicans follow Matt Hall and Eric Nesbitt over that same cliff, lose their seats in the state house and state senate by voting against their constituents? What the evidence of the last 11 years shows, most of them will vote against their own political self-interest and their own constituents to blindly support Donald Trump or MAGA policies.
Well, Jeff, all well said. I'm just going to add one note before we turn to introducing our guests this week, and that is I'm eagerly looking forward to an accounting of the economic damage that has been done by Trump's tariffs to Michigan farmers, apropos of your well-said analysis about the impact on rural Michigan, where many of these Republican reps come from. Their farmer constituents are suffering dramatic losses from the closure of markets and access to China and Canada and to other places. And I think that's going to come home to roost for these Republicans as well.
More on A Republic, if you can keep it, after these messages.
When most of us think about polling, the focus is on those campaign polls telling us which candidates are winning. But the most important polls are for businesses, local governments, and nonprofits assessing the needs and wants of their customers or constituencies.
Those are polls that guide policies and lead to institutional success. Those polls have to get it right, which makes the choice of a public opinion research firm critical. Epic MRA has been trusted for more than 4 decades to get it right. Our clients have included school boards, statewide nonprofits, corporations, as well as the candidates and news media who rely on us during political campaigns. Whether it's just a couple of questions or a full in-depth survey, we are here and ready to help.
You can reach us at epicmra.com.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve on Michigan's public policy landscape? Look no further than Michigan Information and Research Service Incorporated, or MERS. MERS is your go-to source for comprehensive, nonpartisan news and analysis on Michigan's government and public policy. But that's not all. A MERS subscription also gives you access to our powerful legislative monitoring and tracking tools. Stay on top of every bill, amendment, and vote with real-time updates, detailed reports, interactive committee transcripts, legislative analysis tools, and more. Whether you're a policymaker, lobbyist, or just a concerned citizen, MERS keeps you informed with daily updates, exclusive interviews, and detailed reports. Subscribe today and gain access to our extensive archives. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay ahead with MERS. Visit MERS.news to learn more and subscribe. That's MIRS.news. Don't miss out on the insights that matter most.
Hi, Ben Franklin here with a message from our finance department. They've put together a small, exclusive collection of really bitchin' merch for you. We've got our exclusive Trump's Favorite Podcast mug, perfect for those long days of reading through the latest administration indictments. We've got mugs for lovers of sanity, mugs for opponents of dumb fuckery, and finely tailored shirts for lovers of getting dressed. Just head over to the merch store on our website. This square thingy will take you there, or click on the merch store button on arepublicpodcast.com. Support democracy, support freedom, wipe out dumb fuckery. Franklin, out.
Joining in the conversation this week is an expert on U.S.-Canada relations, former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Jim Blanchard. After 8 years as Michigan's governor, Blanchard was named as the nation's representative in Ottawa by President Bill Clinton. He served in that role for 2.5 years. Governor Blanchard holds 2 degrees from Michigan State University and a law degree from the University of Minnesota.
Well, welcome, former governor and ambassador to Canada, Jim Blanchard. We couldn't have a more timely guest on the show, given all the developments of this week. Let's jump right into Trump now basically blackmailing Canada by threatening to not allow the Howe Bridge to open. Tell us how you think that impacts Michigan, Ontario. I mean, what kind of economic mess would this create?
Well, I've worked on this, by the way, for 20 years. This bridge is going to be fabulous. It's the most important infrastructure project, really, in North America, connecting our 2 countries, our 2 states, the province of Ontario It's really the lifeblood of the Great Lakes region in terms of trade, whether it's autos or agriculture or tourism or retailing, towering symbol of our cooperation with Canada. And for anybody, whether it's God meant to president or anybody to try to stop this or fight it at this point is totally ridiculous. It looks like Trump did it like a tweet after being told misinformation by Howard Lutnick, who knows little about trade, Canada, or autos or energy, who then used information from Matthew Maroon, the family that's fought this for 20 years, and just all on a quirk issues this statement, which not only is crazy in terms of trying to stop the bridge, but talks about China was going to try to abolish hockey in Canada. So this is these aren't just abnormal times. These are dangerous times in America with what we're dealing with the Trump administration. Obviously, for Mike Rogers or John James to be siding with Trump is ridiculous. It shows they're really not fit to represent our state. How could they even consider being our senator or governor and take that, automatically agree with Trump without knowing anything? And of course, Trump automatically agreed to put out talking points of the Maroon family. So this is a classic case of how things have gone haywire in Washington, in the White House. And the fact that in Trump, too, he has no one around him who really is thoughtful or qualified. They're all misfits, kooks, and cranks, in my opinion. Other than that,
I love that opinion. I happen to share it. The issue has been decades in the making, and it's been very bipartisan. There's been Republicans and Democratic administrations in Michigan that have been pushing this. Tell us about why this is important in the economic impact, and then we can spend more time talking about the politics. But let's kind of set the stage with why is this a benefit for Michigan as well as Canada?
Well, we're actually a major exporter of manufacturing products, agriculture. It's amazing. Advanced manufacturing, tourism. It's the busiest corridor really in North America. And it's the lifeblood of an integrated auto industry, but it's more than autos. It's advanced manufacturing. Michigan is a major agricultural exporter, for example. And so you were to talk to our people, all those commodities, the fruits, vegetables, so many of them go to Canada, and they go to Canada and stay there, or they go on to Europe. So this is the key trade spot for the state of Michigan. It's the busiest trade corridor, I think, probably in North America, if not the busiest, the second busiest, but probably the busiest. And we're talking about several $1 billion a day of trade going back and forth. And Michigan has more to gain and more to lose by our relations with Canada. And for this new, beautiful 6-lane bridge, highway, which also will, a divided highway, which will also have room for pedestrians and bicycles. So it's huge. And anything that cuts that off is a real problem. There are a lot of other things that, go on. For example, several thousand nurses cross the bridge every day and work in our hospitals, for example, in healthcare. We learned that during COVID, what a lifeblood this crossing is for our health and our jobs. So it's jobs. I mean, by the way, the building trades, they had about 2,000 workers per day for several years working on this. So it's and they're going to be maintaining it as well. So it's jobs, it's trade, it's the lifeblood. It's crazy for anyone to try to stop it. I think we'll get back on track. I've actually talked to a lot of the key players. And as you kind of allude to, this was the signature achievement of actually Republican Governor Rick Snyder. He made it the centerpiece of this first State of the State. And I worked with him on it, actually. So, as I did with Governor Granholm and Governor Whitmer. So it's motherhood, basically. But it is jobs. It's business. It's everything. And not just Detroit. It's West Michigan. Every chamber in the state backed this. There was actually, the Maroon family got a referendum going to try to stop it.
Right. Let's spend a little time talking. You mentioned the Maroon family a couple of times, and certainly we know what that means, and a lot of the political insiders know, but our listeners might not understand the now nearly 100-year history of this Windsor-Detroit crossing. The tunnel everyone knows under the Detroit River, but there's also the Ambassador Bridge, which is the busiest in terms of traffic, truck and car traffic, border crossing in North America. But it's privately owned by the Maroon family, and it's made them billions of dollars, and they've pulled out all the political stops and spread around a lot of money over the last decades to stop the Gordie Howe Bridge. And this seems to be a kind of the last ace up their sleeve to try to thwart the competition that they've spent so many years and so many millions trying to forestall.
Yeah. Well, that's true. I'm not, by the way, I wasn't surprised there was this last ditch effort. I'm surprised that Trump would fall for it so quickly without consulting anybody that knew anything, including his ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra from Michigan, who knows the value of this bridge and this project. So that's what's so alarming and really frightening when you think about it. Yeah, the Maroon family has the Ambassador Bridge. They're going to make money one way or the other. The bottom line is we need the redundancy of two crossings. We learned that in terms of supply chain also during COVID, really. So we need the two crossings. The Ambassador Bridge is going to continue to make money, but they wanted to have the exclusive monopoly. By a series of lawsuits many years ago, they were able to get private ownership of this bridge. It was really a crazy ruling, a Canadian Supreme Court ruling. That should never have really been allowed. But we have a public bridge now owned by Canada and Michigan that's going to compete with it. Of course it will, because it's a modern crossing. There's congestion. There's so many issues as to why we need the new crossing. But the Ambassador Bridge will actually still make money. And the truth is, they should really restore it. They're continually cited by the Canadian government for not keeping it in good repair. They need to do that. And they've tried to fight this. They were able to stop it in the state Senate a few years ago. The state House, our House of Representatives, passed enabling legislation. The Senate got derailed there because of Maroon's influence. And then Governor Snyder wisely made what they call an interlocal agreement, authorized by the Michigan Constitution, to finalize the deal. I was there. The Prime Minister of Canada was there with Rick Snyder, on both sides of the border, announcing this agreement. Every business, every labor union, every group, good government group in the state of Michigan and Ontario was there to celebrate it. So, but we did read today about how many thousands of dollars the Maroon family has given to politicians, largely Republican, who think they need to do their bidding. This is a classic test of who are you for? The people, our state, our future, our jobs, or are you for one guy who has a thing about wanting to dominate relations with Canada? So I think we're going to get this back on track. I actually have talked to our governor and others, and also Governor Snyder, and they're working with our ambassador and with others. So we shouldn't have to do this, though. This is crazy. This is a classic, though. As I think you guys know, I do a lot of political commentary myself. And I say, I want young voters, young people, and young journalists to realize this is not normal. This is an abnormal time. And our democracy is under great threat. Anyone who thinks this is just, will somehow blow over. No, I think it's a real serious challenge. This is an example of it, but there's so much more. ICE in the cities, what's going on in Minneapolis. I don't have to tell you all that. Mm-hmm. You can just watch what's going on.
Well, Jim, you're steeped in political history. You just mentioned you're a well-known analyst. Specifically here, we have the Speaker of the House, Republican Speaker of the House, Matt Hall, saying he's with Trump on this. We have the leading candidate from the Republican Party for Senate, Mike Rogers, saying he supports the president on this. The Republican congressional delegation has been silent, which I think is acquiescence. Can you talk about the political fallout in those individual races that you think might result from this?
I think it's going to be a big issue. Silence doesn't help here. I think it's going to be a big issue in the governor's race, the Senate race. You notice almost immediately, Haley Stevens, one of our candidates, attacked Rogers for supporting this. My guess is Matt Hall doesn't really didn't realize what was going on here. I mean, the problem is we have Republicans in Congress and apparently in the Michigan legislature who are ready to agree with Trump on anything, even before he decides what it is. This is a classic autocracy. I mentioned to somebody, I thought about this. You know, the emperor has no clothes, and the Republicans in the U.S. Senate think they're at a modern fashion show. I mean, this is crazy stuff. You think about it. When are they going to stand up, Mark, Jeff?
Yeah.
When are they going to stand up in the Senate? And now in the Michigan legislature, there's no reason for them to go along with this in the Michigan legislature. It makes no sense. It's contrary to our best interests, the people, the public interest. But there's so many things. Since when do we have ICE wearing masks and carrying assault weapons and attacking people? That's not what it's supposed to be. You know, I'm changing the subject, but I want to mention, during Barack Obama's administration, the administration deported 3.1 million people, not counting those who self-deported or those who were turned away at the border. 3.1 million people were deported, immigrants, during the Obama administration. They did it without masks, assault weapons, running around, throwing people on the ground and making sure it gets filmed to show how tough they are. I don't see anybody who is following this issue pointing out what I just said. And I know that from friends of mine who are top immigration lawyers. So even there, things are out of order. And I'm hoping and I believe, actually, that the voters in Michigan and elsewhere are going to respond next November with another Democratic governor and a Democratic U.S. senator. And I think a couple of those House members are going to be very vulnerable, even the ones that are silent. I think, in Lansing area, even Southwest Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
There's a guy named Sean McCann running over there.
That's right.
We've got a hot contest in the Lansing area. There'll be the Macomb district.
Yep.
I mean, we got to make sure we have good candidates that are working hard. But if I were a Republican, I wouldn't want to be on the ballot this year, to be honest.
Those Republicans, especially the operatives who still have clear eyes, have to be very nervous about all the signs that are there, because so many of the elected officials from Trump on down to people like Tom Barrett and Bill Huizenga in those districts you just mentioned seem completely oblivious to the enormity of what is about to hit them. I did an interview this morning on CBS radio in Los Angeles where they wanted to talk about the 6 Republicans who bucked Trump on the Canadian tariffs. And, is that a big deal? And I said, yes, it is. But the bigger deal is the 211 Republicans who have abdicated their power of the purse to the president, who are voting against their constituents, against the American economy, and against the interests of America just because Trump says so. And I think that's, and you underscored that there, how they'll side with him before they even know what it is they're siding with him on, regardless of if it amounts to political suicide for them. And that's where they're heading right now.
Well, Jeff, you've been a normal, Republican over the years. I realize you're not calling yourself that now. But are they that much afraid of their voters? Are they afraid of violence? I mean, if you're afraid of your voters, why do you want to hold office? I don't get it.
It is. I mean, there's going to be a whole field of psychology and sociology that's dedicated to this period of American history. I think when this is all said and done, how did tens of millions of people and these very accomplished elected officials with election history that predates Trump, how did they abdicate all that? You look at Mike Rogers, for instance, Mike Rogers, who was a normal Republican and anti-Trump until he got thirsty and decided he'd been out of the limelight for too long and would say and do anything to get elected to the U.S. Senate. It really is telling. It reveals the character and how there's a lack of it among so many Republicans.
Yeah, it's really stunning. There's a movie out, Nuremberg, on Netflix. It's really good. And I've followed Nuremberg before that. I actually knew a guy that worked there for Justice Jackson, a guy named Henry King, who helped spearhead the Canada-U.S. Law Institute. Henry's passed away, but he was there at Nuremberg. And I say to myself, after all this is over and we try to get some sense of normality, we're going to have an audit of how all this happened. Why all these rich corporate executives went to Washington to fund a ballroom or an inauguration, and for extra money got some decisions, or they thought they would, for their businesses. How it was that members of Congress bent the knee. How it was that the administration went after knowledge, basically the truth, after universities, law firms. I think we need an audit. I won't call it the Mar-a-Lago trials, okay? That's my idea. But I'm not talking about hanging people. I'm talking about having an audit, an honest audit for history, for the future, of how all this really unfolded, and all the people who should feel shame in what they do to enable what's going on here, whether it's renaming the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts or taking over the Institute of Peace, which is not a public facility. It's a nonprofit. He took it over. He's put his name on it. This stuff has become commonplace now. People say, that's Trump, or they say, Jim, your party's worse. You guys are worse. I said, well, tell me what. Well, they mentioned a couple of our far left wingers. I said, we have a few kooks. Maybe you have 6 or 7. I don't know. But you had 138 vote against certifying the election in 2020. What are you talking about? It's not equivalent. It's a false equivalency here.
Right.
It just isn't. But I get that from friends that say to me, oh, I'd vote for you, Jimmy, but your party, they're really bad. I said, oh, what's so bad about Gretchen Whitmer or Gary Peters or Debbie Stabenow or Alyssa Slotkin? What's so bad about Haley Stevens or Gretchen Whitmer? Are these left-wing crazy? Are these a radical left? What's so bad about them? They don't have an answer.
They don't. Speaking of kookiness, I want to touch on one other topic with you, though. You're a lawyer by training and practice. You serve the state very well in Congress. I want to get your reaction to this attempt to indict Senator Mark Kelly and Senator Alyssa Slotkin and 4 members of Congress for telling the truth in the video about the law governing the military of this country. Can you imagine that would have happened when you served in Congress?
No.
Give us your reaction to all of that.
Well, it is outrageous. It's, first of all, their First Amendment rights. Number one, forget they are a senator or members of Congress. Their First Amendment rights. So, I mean, it's absurd. And for Trump to say they should be hanged. And then, of course, Pam Bondi and the others, they get going and want to interview them. I'm just glad they stood up as they did. I've watched Alyssa Slotkin handle it. And the others, Mark Kelly. I mean, it's disgraceful. And every senator should be speaking out against this. They could be next. Yep. What is wrong with them? This is, it's not only weaponizing it's fighting the First Amendment, prosecuting someone for telling the truth, but also expressing their First Amendment right. Forget they're members of Congress and they have the speech and debate clause and some other things that protect them. I'm just stunned there isn't more outrage. I think the outrage is more at the grassroots, but I'm stunned at it, and I'm pleased that the grand juries are not willing to go along. Ordinary citizens are not willing to buy this stuff. So I don't know why the Republicans in the Senate are letting it happen. What are they telling them? Oh, they're telling them privately, though. They're with them. They're with them. So, that we get, but not publicly.
Yeah.
That sounds like, I'm a hard partisan, but Mark, I've been a reasonable guy here.
Yes.
Well, you guys know that. I'm not. But the longer, of course, I've lived longer than most of these guys, and I've studied history like you guys have. And this country's in trouble for this. This is serious trouble. We did a forum recently, it was this Carter Center, Gerald Ford group wanted us to do a forum on civility. And it was not to be one where we could totally analyze what's going on with Trump. But I did say, we wouldn't be having a conference on civility if it was 2015. We wouldn't
That's
be.
True.
It's one man and his movement. But it's all these people who enable it.
Yeah.
And they're part of it.
when you look at the political history that was there on stage, the battles that you and John Engler fought during the 1980s, and then the gubernatorial race in 1990, that is normal politics. It's bare knuckles American politics, but you can sit there, now these 30 years later, 35 years later, and have that conversation about normalcy, because you're a normal Democrat and he was a normal Republican. And in normal times, that's the kind of disagreement that people can have. And clearly, we're not in those times. It is very alarming. You've laid that out very well. You mentioned history, and I know that we are pressed for time here. It's gone by very quickly. I wanted to pay a little homage to history here. Tom Cleary died this week, a well-known, long-standing figure in Lansing, at 93 years old. And there's been a lot of social media tributes to him, and I've seen it from bipartisan Democrats, Republicans, the kind of person that cut across partisanship and really made an impact on Lansing, arguably invented the multi-client lobbying industry in Lansing, did it with honor, integrity, and character. And I just wanted to mention his passing here. I know that, he's somebody that you would have encountered during your time in Lansing. And so I just wanted to have you comment on that.
I didn't. I'm sorry to learn that. I'm in Dunedin, Florida. We were in Michigan we've been in Michigan for the last few weeks. I'm glad I'm in better weather. Did not know he passed. No, he was a great guy. I've known him for over 40 years. His daughter-in-law, Linda, manages the Michigan Political History Society.
Mm-hmm.
So that he's got longevity through in-laws, as well as his own family, as well as his legacy.
Mm-hmm.
But I worked with him. My office door was always open for him because he was a straight player.
Mm-hmm.
And he cared about the same things we do. Yeah. One of those, there are many like that. There's an infrastructure in Lansing. And of course, wasn't a part of it really when I became governor, because I'd been in the Congress, not in Lansing. But there's an infrastructure of people that really care about what goes on there, whether it's capital restoration or being honest lobbyists, and there is such a thing, as you know.
There are.
Or lawyers who handle things. One of mine passed away, Mike Hodge, my guy.
Yes, Mike.
Great
over
guy.
a year ago now. So they help make things work. And Tom Cleary was one of those people. They keep the norms, and they give honor to the profession.
Certainly do. Former ambassador, former governor, Jim Blanchard, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your expertise, this very timely insight into the Canadian-Michigan bridge issue that Donald Trump has ignited, and John James and Mike Rogers and others have fanned the flames this week. We appreciate it very much.
Well, I thank you. I want to end by saying I'm happy to do something again in the future. I am staying in touch with our friends in Canada, both the Prime Minister's office, the Ontario Premier's office. My friends there who I worked with when I was ambassador, I stay with them, whether they're in Washington or in Ottawa, because the bonds are, I tell people, I do a lot of Canadian TV, and I tell people, look, 80 to 90% of Americans believe Canada is our best friend, ally, and partner. Always remember that. And they'll say, we understand that, Jim. We hear that. But, 49% of the people did vote for this guy. I said, yeah, well, they didn't vote against Canada. And the good news is, as you see now, both in the Senate and the House, there has been a resolution passed narrowly supporting Canada on the tariff issues. So that's a crack in the system, I think. It's a sign of good things, I think, to come.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks for fighting to get that bridge opened.
Yep. Yeah, we will. Thanks.
And with that, we're done for this week. Our tremendous thanks to Governor Jim Blanchard for sharing his experience both as ambassador and governor, and his insightful political analysis on how this will play out in 2026 elections.
A reminder to get a free subscription to our YouTube channel so you can not only hear us, but you can see us. The video version includes added background videos. Click on the link on our website, arepublicpodcast.com, for your free subscription.
And for the record, none of this video podcast is lip-synced, but I am better looking and thinner in real life than I appear on YouTube. But to keep the MAGAs happy, it's entirely in English. If the Republic is still standing and the FBI doesn't mistake us for Washington Post reporters, Mark and I will return next week. As always, thank you for your attention to this matter.
A Republic, if you can keep it, is a copyrighted presentation of Michigan citizens for a better tomorrow.